Find someone presentable, she said, her voice cutting clean through the polished glass room. Someone who doesn't look like he wandered in by accident. The boardroom chuckled softly, the kind of laughter that wore suits and hid behind million-dollar smiles, and then her eyes moved, scanning past tailored jackets and polished shoes until they stopped unexpectedly on the man standing near the back wall holding a stack of maintenance reports like they weighed more than they should, and for a moment the air shifted. Ethan Cole didn't move right away. He stood there in a plain gray shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to show hands that knew work, not performance, his posture calm, not defensive, not eager, just steady, like a man who had long ago stopped measuring his worth by the volume of other people's voices. You, Scarlett Vaughn said, tilting her chin slightly, her tone no longer amused but deliberate now. What's your name? A few executives exchanged glances, one of them whispering something that sparked another quiet ripple of laughter, but Ethan stepped forward anyway, slow, unhurried, as if time belonged to him more than it did to the room. Ethan, he said, his voice low, even carrying without effort. Ethan Cole. The silence that followed wasn't loud, but it was different, like something unseen had just entered the room and taken a seat at the table. Scarlett studied him, really studied him this time, not the way people looked at staff but the way they looked at variables they couldn't immediately solve. Her heels clicked once against the marble floor as she shifted her weight. Ethan Cole, she repeated, almost tasting the name, then folded her arms lightly. I need a boyfriend. A pause. A blink. Then a few stifled laughs broke through again, sharper this time. More confident now that the absurdity had been spoken out loud. Not a real one, she added, her tone turning transactional, controlled. A temporary arrangement. 1 month. Public appearances. Dinners. Events. You stand beside me, you play the part. In return I compensate you well. More than whatever you're making now. She let the words settle like an offer no one in his position was supposed to refuse. Across the table someone smirked, another leaned back in their chair, already writing the ending in their head. Ethan didn't answer right away. He glanced briefly at the polished surface of the table, at the reflection of a world built on leverage and perception, then back at her, his expression unchanged, his eyes clear in a way that didn't ask for permission. You want me to pretend? He said, not as a question, but as a simple restatement, his tone steady, almost quiet enough to miss if the room hadn't gone so still. Scarlett nodded once. Exactly. 3 quick breaths passed between them, the kind that measured more than time, and somewhere near the window, the faint hum of the city drifted upward, distant and indifferent. Ethan shifted the reports in his hand, setting them gently on the edge of the table, the paper making a soft, almost respectful sound against the marble. Then he met her gaze fully, not challenging, not submissive, just present. I don't sell something I wouldn't respect, he said, his voice calm, unshaken, landing with a weight no one in the room had prepared for, and just like that, the laughter didn't return, the smirks faded, and for the first time since the meeting began, the most powerful people in the room had nothing to say. If you're enjoying this story, take a second to subscribe. It really helps the channel. Now let's go on. No one spoke for a second too long, and in a room where silence usually meant control, this one felt different, like something had slipped beyond their reach. A man near the end of the table cleared his throat, forcing a thin smile back onto his face. That is admirable, he said, tapping a pen against his notepad. But let us be realistic here. A few heads nodded, relieved to return to something familiar, something structured, something that made sense in their world. Scarlett did not look away from Ethan. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus, like she had just discovered a variable she had not accounted for. Everything has a price, she said calmly, her tone quieter now, less for the room and more for him. You just have not named yours yet. Ethan exhaled slowly. Not irritated, not impressed, just steady, like a man who had heard that sentence in different forms his entire life. Respect is not something I trade, he replied. A quick exchange of glances moved across the executives, some amused, others annoyed, one or two quietly intrigued. The city light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long reflections across the table, softening edges that moments ago had felt sharp and controlled. Scarlett stepped closer, the subtle scent of her perfume catching in the still air, not overpowering, just present, like everything else about her. Then do not pretend, she said, adjusting her approach with precision. Be exactly who you are. Just do it beside me. The room shifted again. This was no longer a joke. This was negotiation. Ethan studied her, not her title, not her clothes, but the space between her words, the reason behind them. Why me? He asked simply. It was not curiosity that drove the question, it was clarity. Scarlett paused, and for the first time since she had entered the room, her answer was not immediate. The board members leaned in, subtle but noticeable, as if they too wanted to understand what she saw that they did not. Because you are the only one in this room who did not try to impress me, she said finally, her voice softer, almost honest. A faint shift moved through the air. Something unspoken, something real. Ethan let that sit for a moment, his gaze steady, his posture unchanged. And what happens when people realize it is not real? He asked. One of the executives chuckled under his breath. They will not, Scarlett answered before anyone else could speak, her confidence returning, sharp and controlled. People believe what they are shown. Ethan glanced briefly at the table again, at the carefully curated world that lived on appearances, then back at her. 3 seconds passed. Then 4. The hum of the building seemed louder now, like the walls themselves were listening. He reached for the reports he had set down earlier, sliding them slightly to the side, not leaving, not yet. If I stand next to you, he said slowly, choosing each word with quiet precision, I do not lie. I do not perform. I do not become something else so other people feel comfortable. A few eyebrows lifted. One man leaned back, folding his arms, watching more closely now. Scarlett held his gaze. Then what do you become? She asked. Ethan did not hesitate this time. The same man I am when no one is watching. The sentence landed softly, but it stayed, echoing in a way that no raised voice ever could. For a moment Scarlett said nothing. Her expression did not soften, but something behind it shifted, something less guarded, less calculated. 1 month, she said again, but the tone had changed, less like an order, more like an offer she was not entirely sure how to frame anymore. No script. No pretending. You stand beside me, and that is enough. The room held its breath, waiting for the answer they thought they already understood. Ethan looked at her one last time, not at the CEO, not at the power, but at the person standing in front of him, and then he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not agreement. Not surrender. Just acknowledgement. And somehow, that quiet motion carried more weight than any contract they could have written. The meeting did not resume the way it was supposed to, not with charts or projections or carefully rehearsed numbers, but with something quieter, something harder to control, and as the executives slowly gathered their papers one by one, their glances drifted back to Ethan as if trying to solve a problem that did not belong in their world. This is highly irregular, one of them muttered, adjusting his tie as he stood, his voice low but not low enough. We are discussing optics at the highest level, not personal experiments. Scarlett did not respond immediately. She simply picked up her tablet, her posture composed, her expression unreadable, but the rhythm of the room had already shifted, and everyone could feel it. We are done for today, she said finally, her tone calm, final, leaving no space for argument, and just like that, the room began to empty, leather chairs sliding softly across the floor, quiet conversations trailing behind polished shoes as people exited in pairs, in silence or in confusion. Ethan did not rush. He gathered the reports he had brought, aligning the edges with deliberate care, as if the simple act of straightening paper mattered more than anything that had just happened. Scarlett remained near the head of the table, watching him now without pretense, without performance, as if seeing him clearly required the absence of everyone else. You said yes, she noted, her voice softer now that the audience was gone. Ethan shook his head slightly, not dismissive, just precise. I said I would stand next to you, he corrected. A faint smile touched the corner of her lips, not amused, not mocking, just curious. Most people would have asked for a number, she said. Ethan slid the reports under his arm. Most people are trying to become something else, he replied. The light outside had shifted, the afternoon sun stretching longer across the city, casting a warm reflection through the glass that softened the hard edges of the room. Scarlett walked toward him slowly, her heels no longer echoing as sharply, her presence less like a command and more like a question. There is an event tonight, she said. A fundraiser. 8 o'clock. Formal. Ethan nodded once, absorbing the information without reacting to the setting, the status, or the expectation behind it. Where? He asked. The Grand Crescent Hotel, she answered, watching his face for any sign of hesitation, any crack in the calm. There was none. I will send a car, she added. Ethan adjusted his grip on the reports again, a small, almost habitual movement. That will not be necessary, he said. Scarlett raised an eyebrow. It is expected. Ethan met her gaze, steady as before. So is pretending, he replied quietly. For a moment she said nothing. The faint hum of the building filled the space between them, along with something else, something less defined, less controlled. 8 o'clock, she repeated, as if anchoring the moment before it drifted too far from what she understood. Ethan gave a slight nod and turned toward the door, not waiting for dismissal, not seeking approval, simply moving when it was time to move. His steps were unhurried, measured, the kind that did not echo because they did not need to be heard. Scarlett watched him reach the door, her mind working in ways it had not in a long time, not calculating, not strategizing, just observing. Ethan, she called, and he paused, his hand resting lightly on the handle. He did not turn right away. If you walk into that room tonight, she continued, her voice quieter now, more personal than it had been all day, people will assume you belong to me. A brief silence followed, the kind that stretched just enough to reveal what was underneath it. Ethan turned then, meeting her eyes once more, his expression unchanged, his presence steady as ever. People can assume whatever they need to, he said, his voice calm, grounded. It does not change who I am. And with that, he opened the door and stepped out, leaving behind a room that had never felt so large or so quiet. By 7:45, the Grand Crescent Hotel glowed like a promise made to people who never had to question whether they belonged, its glass facade reflecting the last stretch of evening light as black cars pulled up one after another, doors opening to polished shoes and tailored confidence, laughter floating softly beneath the hum of conversation and distant music. Inside, chandeliers cast a warm gold across marble floors, and every detail seemed intentional, curated, controlled, the kind of place where nothing was left to chance. Scarlett Vaughn stood near the center of it all, her presence effortless, her posture exact, dressed in a deep midnight gown that caught the light with every subtle movement, her expression composed in that familiar way that kept the world at a comfortable distance. Miss Vaughn, over here, a voice called, followed by the soft click of cameras and the murmur of admiration, and she turned just enough to acknowledge without fully engaging, a balance she had perfected over years of being watched. Your date tonight, another voice asked, curious, probing. Is it true you are bringing someone new? A faint smile touched her lips, controlled, unreadable. You will see, she replied simply. Across the entrance, the revolving door turned again, slower this time, and a man stepped inside without announcement, without hesitation, without drawing attention, and yet somehow the space around him shifted anyway. Ethan Cole adjusted the cuff of his dark suit, simple, well-fitted but not extravagant, the kind chosen for purpose, not impression, his shoes quiet against the marble as he moved forward with the same steady pace he carried everywhere else. A few heads turned, not because of recognition, but because something about him did not match the room and yet did not feel out of place either. A server paused for half a second longer than necessary, a guest glanced twice, and then the quiet returned, but it was not the same quiet. Scarlett saw him before anyone else spoke his name. Her gaze found him across the room, and for the briefest moment, something unguarded flickered beneath her composure, something close to relief, though she would not have called it that. He did not rush to her. He did not scan the room for approval. He simply walked step by step until he stood beside her, not behind, not ahead, exactly beside, as if that had always been the arrangement. You are on time, she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. I said I would be here, he replied, just as quietly. A man in a tailored navy suit approached almost immediately, his smile practiced, his eyes calculating. Scarlett, he said warmly, extending a hand, then glancing at Ethan with open curiosity. And you must be. He left the sentence hanging, an invitation, a test. Scarlett opened her mouth, ready to define the narrative the way she always did. But Ethan spoke first, his tone calm, grounded. Ethan, he said simply, shaking the man's hand without hesitation, without force, just presence. The man hesitated for a fraction of a second, as if expecting more, a title, a position, something to categorize, but nothing came. Ethan, he repeated, masking his uncertainty with a polite nod. Good to meet you. As he moved on, the questions lingered, unspoken but growing, weaving through the room in quiet threads. Scarlett turned slightly toward Ethan, her voice barely above a whisper. You are not making this easy, she said. Ethan looked out across the room, taking in the polished world that thrived on perception. I am not making it false, he answered. 3 quick exchanges of glances passed between nearby guests, 2 slow steps of a passing server softened the moment, and then a single realization settled between them. Scarlett inhaled gently, her shoulders lowering just enough to betray the shift. For the first time that evening, she was not controlling the room. She was feeling it. And beside her, without trying to lead, without trying to follow, Ethan simply stood, steady as ever, and somehow that was the one thing the room could not ignore. The music shifted into something softer, a low-string melody that moved beneath the conversation like a quiet current, and as waiters passed with silver trays and practiced smiles, the attention in the room began to orbit, slowly, almost reluctantly, toward the 2 figures who did not seem to be performing for it. You are being watched, Scarlett murmured without turning her head, her gaze still forward, her posture flawless, every inch the composed executive the world expected. That is not new, Ethan replied, his tone even, his eyes moving calmly across the room, not searching, just observing, the way someone did when they were not trying to belong but also not trying to leave. A woman in a crimson dress approached, her smile bright, her curiosity sharper than her words. Scarlett, you always surprise me, she said lightly, her eyes flicking toward Ethan with interest that was almost playful. And you brought someone who does not look like he cares about any of this. Scarlett's lips curved slightly, a controlled expression that could mean anything or nothing. Maybe that is why I did, she answered. The woman laughed softly, leaning in just enough to study Ethan more closely. So what do you do, Ethan? She asked, the question wrapped in politeness but edged with expectation. 3 quick beats passed, 1 glance, 1 breath, 1 moment of quiet. Then Ethan answered simply, I raise my daughter. The woman blinked, caught off guard, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second before returning. That is admirable, she said, though the word sounded smaller now, less certain. She excused herself soon after, her curiosity replaced by something she could not easily define, and as she walked away, 2 nearby guests leaned toward each other, their whispers low but persistent, like ripples spreading across still water. Scarlett turned slightly toward Ethan, her voice lower now, more personal than it had been since the evening began. You could have said anything, she said. Ethan lifted a glass of water from a passing tray, nodding his thanks to the server before replying. I did, he said. The simplicity of it lingered between them, not defensive, not proud, just true. Across the room, a group of investors gathered near the stage, their conversation louder, more animated, and one of them gestured in their direction, a subtle invitation or perhaps a test. They expect us, Scarlett said, straightening slightly, slipping back into the role she had worn for years, though something about it felt less certain now. Ethan glanced toward the group, then back at her. Then let us not keep them waiting, he replied, not as a command, not as submission, just alignment. As they moved together side by side, the room adjusted around them, conversations pausing, glances following, the quiet awareness growing stronger with each step. One of the investors, a tall man with a polished presence and a practiced smile, stepped forward to greet them. Scarlett, always a pleasure, he said, then turned his attention to Ethan with a look that measured more than it welcomed. And this must be the man who has everyone talking. Ethan met his gaze calmly, offering a simple nod. People talk, he said. A few soft chuckles followed, but they faded quickly, replaced by something else, something more attentive. The man tilted his head slightly. Well, you certainly made an impression, he said. Scarlett watched the exchange closely, her usual instinct to control the narrative held back by something she did not fully understand yet. Impressions do not last, Ethan replied, his voice steady, almost quiet against the low hum of the room, but character does. The words settled in a way that felt heavier than they sounded, and for a brief moment, no one responded. The music continued, the lights shimmered, the room breathed, but something had shifted again. Something deeper this time. Scarlett felt it, not as a loss of control, but as the presence of something she had not allowed herself to trust in years, something unpolished, uncalculated, and undeniably real. And standing beside her, without effort, without performance, Ethan remained exactly who he said he would be. The same man whether the room was watching or not. The applause near the stage rose gently, a signal that someone important had begun speaking. But the attention did not fully settle there, not tonight, not when something quieter was unfolding just a few steps away, something the room could not quite explain. Scarlett stood beside Ethan, her posture still composed, but her awareness no longer fixed on the performance ahead, instead drifting back to the man next to her, to the way he occupied space without asking for it. "You changed the tone," she said under her breath, her voice controlled but softer than before. Ethan did not look at her immediately. His eyes followed the movement of the room, the rhythm of people trying to impress each other, the careful choreography of status and expectation. "I did not try to," he replied. "That is the difference," she said, and for a moment, there was no edge in her words, only observation. A server passed again, offering champagne, and Scarlett took one glass, then hesitated before taking a second and handing it to Ethan. He accepted it with a slight nod, holding it without urgency, without the need to perform even something as simple as a toast. Across the room, a younger executive leaned toward an older investor, whispering something that drew a subtle smirk, their eyes flicking toward Ethan again, curiosity now mixed with something sharper, something closer to doubt. "They are trying to figure you out," Scarlett said quietly. Ethan allowed a faint breath of a smile, not amused, not bothered, just aware. "They do not need to," he answered. 3 quick glances from across the room, 2 slow steps from a passing guest, 1 quiet shift in Scarlett's expression, and something beneath her usual control began to loosen, not dramatically, just enough to be felt. "You make it sound simple," she said. Ethan turned his head slightly then, meeting her gaze, steady as ever. "It is," he replied. "People make it complicated when they are afraid of being seen." The words settled deeper than she expected, and for a moment, Scarlett did not respond. Instead, she looked away toward the stage, toward the polished world she had mastered, and yet something about it felt distant now, like a language she still spoke fluently but no longer believed in the same way. "I was not always like this," she said suddenly, her voice lower, more personal, the kind of tone that did not belong in rooms like this. Ethan did not interrupt. He simply listened. "There was a time when I thought honesty was enough," she continued, her eyes fixed ahead, her reflection faint in the glass panels beyond the crowd. "But it cost me more than I was willing to lose." A brief silence followed, not empty but full, like something important had been placed between them. "So you built something that could not be taken," Ethan said, not as a question but as understanding. Scarlett nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Control," she said. "Structure. Distance." Ethan glanced down at the untouched drink in his hand, then back at her. "And does it work?" he asked. She let out a small breath, one that did not quite reach the surface. "It used to," she admitted. Across the room the speech ended and applause followed, louder this time, more unified, but it felt distant, like it belonged to another story entirely. The lights shimmered, the music returned, and the room resumed its motion, but something between them had shifted again, something quieter, deeper, something neither of them could ignore anymore. Scarlett turned to him fully now, her composure still intact, but her eyes different, less guarded, more present. "Tonight was supposed to be a performance," she said. Ethan met her gaze, calm, unwavering. "Then do not perform," he replied. The simplicity of it landed in a way that made everything else feel unnecessary, and for the first time in a long time Scarlett Vaughn, who had built her world on control, stood in the middle of it and realized she did not want to control this moment, not anymore. The music softened again, drifting into something almost reflective, and the room, though still alive with conversation and movement, seemed to hold a quieter undercurrent now, like a tide pulling beneath the surface, unnoticed by most but undeniable to those standing still enough to feel it. Scarlett stood beside Ethan, her fingers lightly resting against the stem of her glass, her posture unchanged, But her focus no longer scattered across the room, instead drawn inward, toward something she had not allowed herself to face in years. "You make it sound easy," she said again. But this time her voice carried something different. Not resistance, not skepticism, but something closer to uncertainty. Ethan did not answer immediately. He watched a couple pass by, their laughter rehearsed, their smiles precise, then turned his attention back to her. "It is not easy," he said quietly. "It is just honest." 3 words passed between them. 2 seconds of silence followed, one realization settling deeper than either expected. Across the room, a familiar figure began moving toward them with measured confidence, his expression controlled, his presence deliberate, the kind of man who did not approach without purpose. "Scarlett," he said as he arrived, his tone smooth but edged with something sharper beneath it. "I was wondering when you would introduce us." Scarlett straightened slightly, her composure returning in an instant, though it no longer felt as effortless as it once had. "Daniel," she replied, her voice neutral, her expression carefully balanced. "This is Ethan." Daniel's gaze shifted to Ethan, assessing, calculating, the polite smile never quite reaching his eyes. "I have heard a lot about you in the last hour," he said, extending his hand. Ethan accepted it with the same calm presence he had shown all evening, no hesitation, no need to prove anything. "Then you already know more than I do," he replied. A faint pause followed, subtle but noticeable, and Daniel's smile tightened just slightly. "Scarlett tends to keep interesting company," Daniel said, glancing back at her with a look that carried history, expectation and something unspoken. "Especially when there is something important at stake." Scarlett's jaw tightened for the briefest moment, a flicker of tension breaking through her control before she steadied herself again. "This is not the time or place," she said quietly. Daniel let out a soft breath, almost amused, though the edge remained. "Everything is the time and place when people are watching," he replied. The words lingered, heavier than the tone suggested, and a few nearby guests slowed their conversations just enough to listen without appearing to. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, not stepping forward, not stepping back, simply present, grounded. "If you have something to say," he said calmly, his voice steady, "you can say it without an audience." 3 glances from nearby observers, 2 steps of a passing server, 1 quiet shift in Daniel's posture, and the balance in the moment changed again. Daniel studied Ethan for a second longer than necessary, as if recalibrating something he had not expected to encounter. "You are confident," he said. Ethan met his gaze evenly. "I am clear," he answered. Scarlett watched the exchange, something tightening in her chest, not fear, not exactly, but recognition. The kind that came when 2 worlds collided and neither one behaved the way it was supposed to. "Daniel," she said, her voice firmer now, reclaiming the space between them, "this arrangement is my decision." Daniel's eyes flickered back to her, the controlled smile returning, though it felt thinner now. "Of course it is," he said, nodding slowly, "but decisions have consequences." The room seemed to quiet again, not entirely, but enough to feel the weight of that sentence settle into the air. Scarlett did not respond immediately. For a moment, she stood there between expectation and truth, between control and something far less predictable. Then she turned slightly toward Ethan, not for permission, not for validation, but for alignment, and in that small, almost imperceptible movement, something shifted again. Because for the first time, the decision she was making did not feel like strategy, felt like risk, and somehow standing beside him, it did not feel like something to avoid. The silence that followed did not break immediately. It stretched, thin but unyielding, like a line drawn between what had been said and what could not be taken back. And for a moment the room continued as if nothing had happened, glasses clinking softly, distant laughter rising and falling, but closer, around them, the air held still. Scarlett did not look at Daniel right away. Her eyes remained forward, her posture steady, but something behind her composure had shifted, something quieter, something more certain. "Consequences are not new to me," she said finally, her voice calm, controlled but no longer defensive. Daniel studied her, his expression tightening just enough to reveal the expectation beneath it. "No," he replied, "but this one is different." 3 quick glances from nearby guests, 2 hushed whispers, 1 subtle step closer from someone pretending not to listen, and the moment expanded, drawing attention without needing to demand it. Ethan remained still beside her, not intervening, not retreating, simply present, his silence not empty but deliberate. Scarlett turned then, fully this time, meeting Daniel's gaze with a steadiness that had nothing to do with control and everything to do with choice. "Then let it be different," she said. The words landed softly, but they carried weight, enough to shift the balance again. Daniel's smile returned, but it no longer held the same confidence. "You are risking more than you think," he said, lowering his voice slightly, as if the intimacy of the warning might make it more convincing. Scarlett did not look away. "And you are assuming I have not already calculated that," she replied. A brief pause followed, one that did not invite response, and for the first time since he had approached, Daniel seemed to hesitate, not in his words but in his certainty. Ethan exhaled quietly, his gaze moving across the room once more. Then back to Scarlett, not guiding, not correcting, simply aligning with whatever she chose next. The music shifted again, softer now, almost distant, and a server passed between them, the movement breaking the tension just enough to allow the moment to breathe. Daniel straightened slightly, adjusting his jacket, reclaiming what composure he could. "Very well," he said, nodding once, his tone returning to something closer to neutral, though the edge remained beneath it. "I hope you know what you are doing." Scarlett held his gaze for 1 second longer than necessary, then turned away, signaling the end of the exchange without needing to say it. Daniel lingered for a fraction of a moment, then stepped back into the flow of the room, his presence dissolving into conversation and light, but the impact of his words did not leave with him. For a few seconds neither Scarlett nor Ethan spoke. The room resumed around them, louder now, more animated, as if the tension had only made everything else more alive. Scarlett let out a slow breath, one she had not realized she was holding, her fingers relaxing slightly around the glass. "That was not part of the plan," she said quietly. Ethan glanced at her, his expression unchanged, his voice steady. "Neither was this," he replied. 3 words, 2 seconds of silence, one realization settling deeper than anything said before. Scarlett looked at him then, really looked at him, not as a solution, not as a strategy, but as a person standing beside her without expectation. "You did not step in," she said, her tone not accusing but curious. Ethan met her gaze. "You did not need me to," he answered. The simplicity of it lingered, and something in her expression softened, not dramatically, just enough to be real. Around them the night continued, the lights shimmering, the music carrying, but for the first time in a long time, Scarlett Vaughn stood in the center of it all and realized that control was not the same as strength, and standing beside her, without claiming space or demanding it, Ethan had already shown her the difference. The evening had begun to thin, not in noise but in meaning, as conversations grew lighter and the weight of impression gave way to the quiet fatigue of performance, and beneath the glow of chandeliers, something real lingered between two people who had not come here to find it. Scarlett stood near the edge of the ballroom now, the glass walls, reflecting the city lights stretching miles into the distance, her posture still composed but no longer guarded in the same way, her reflection softer, less distant. Ethan stood beside her, not close enough to claim anything, not far enough to disappear, exactly where he had been all night, present without pressure. "They will talk about this tomorrow," Scarlett said, her voice low, thoughtful rather than concerned. Ethan followed her gaze out toward the city, the slow movement of headlights below tracing quiet lines through the dark. "People always do," he replied. 3 seconds passed, 2 breaths shared. One moment where neither of them felt the need to fill the silence. Scarlett turned slightly toward him, her expression different now, not the controlled precision of a CEO, but something more human, more uncertain, more honest. "This was supposed to be simple," she said. Ethan gave a faint nod. "Most things are until people decide they are not," he answered. A soft exhale left her, something between a laugh and a release, and she looked down briefly at the glass in her hand before setting it aside on a nearby table, as if letting go of something she no longer needed to hold on to. "I built everything around control," she said quietly. "Every decision, every move, every relationship." She paused, her eyes lifting again to meet his. "And tonight, for the first time, I did not feel in control." Ethan met her gaze, steady as ever, his voice calm, grounded. "And you are still standing," he said. The simplicity of it settled in a way that felt stronger than reassurance, not denying her fear, not dismissing it, just placing it in perspective. Scarlett held his gaze for a moment longer, something unspoken moving between them, something that did not need to be defined to be understood. "What happens when this ends?" she asked, her voice quieter now, not part of any performance, not meant for anyone else. Ethan did not answer immediately. He looked out across the room one last time, at the people still moving, still talking, still performing, then back at her. "That depends," he said slowly, "on whether it was ever pretending." 3 words lingered 2 seconds. Stretched, one truth settled deeper than either of them expected. Scarlett's expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough to reveal what she had been holding back, the realization that somewhere between the offer and the moment, something had changed. "It was not," she said, almost to herself but loud enough to be heard. The music softened again, the crowd thinning now, the night easing toward its quiet conclusion, and for the first time since the evening began, Scarlett Vaughn did not look like a woman managing a room. She looked like someone standing at the edge of something new. She took a small step closer, not calculated, not strategic, just real. "Then maybe we do not end it," she said. Ethan studied her for a brief moment, not searching for flaws, not questioning her intent, just seeing her clearly, the same way he had from the beginning. "Maybe we do not start it with a lie either," he replied. The words were quiet, but they carried a weight that left no room for misunderstanding. Scarlett nodded slowly, her shoulders relaxing in a way that no one in that room had ever seen before, her voice softer now, but certain. "Then we start it with the truth." The city lights reflected in the glass behind them, the room fading into the background, and in that quiet space between what had been arranged and what had become real, neither of them moved to define it further, because for once, nothing needed to be proven, nothing needed to be performed, and for the first time that night, the silence between them was not filled with expectation, but with something far more powerful, something steady, something earned, something real. A powerful journey unfolds between a single dad and a female CEO as their worlds collide in one of the most compelling, touching stories about dignity, truth, and emotional redemption. What begins as a calculated arrangement quickly transforms into something far deeper as the single dad refuses to compromise his values while the female CEO, known for control and precision, slowly confronts emotions she has long buried. Set against the backdrop of elite corporate life and a high-profile gala, this narrative explores how authenticity challenges power and how quiet strength can shift even the most guarded hearts. Through subtle tension, meaningful dialogue, and moments of silence, this stands out among touching stories that highlight respect, character, and second chances. As perception fades and truth rises, both characters are forced to choose between image and reality, making this one of the most unforgettable, touching stories where love is not performed but discovered. A deeply human experience that resonates with fans of touching stories and emotional storytelling, reminding us that sometimes the strongest connection begins without pretending, making it one of the most meaningful, touching stories told today. If this story stayed with you, you're not alone. Subscribe. There's more waiting to be told.